I didn't even know concussions, there wasn't an emotional piece. I thought it was
Mm-hmm.
just purely physical, and I was just so angry. And it's like I could tell that I was angry, but I couldn't do anything about it. And I was so disconnected from my body. I would cry at any given moment when mentally I was okay.
Welcome to the Advanced Women's Health Podcast, where we empower women with the latest insights and advice on holistic health. From cutting-edge medical research to practical wellness tips, our mission is to help you thrive at every stage of life. Join us as we explore topics ranging from hormonal balance and reproductive health to nutrition and mental well-being. Whether you're seeking solutions for a specific health concern or simply want to enhance your overall wellness, you're in the right place. Let's embark on this journey to better health together. This is the Advanced Women's Health Podcast. Hello, everyone, and welcome back. I am so excited to dive into today's episode with Dr. Bianca. She is here with me at our Kingston clinic. I am in office today too, so we could literally touch each other. And I am just so excited to dive into your journey and dive into how you love to navigate women's health. And so why don't we just jump right in and take it away and give me an overview of who you are, what you're about, and what got you into naturopathic medicine.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name's Dr. Bianca. I'm really happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
It was forced.
So essentially, my whole journey sort of started with me wanting to go to medical school and kind of go through that route. And then usually you have your applications in your third year of university, and something just didn't feel right. So I was like, you know what? I'm just not going to apply. I'm just going to think about it. Everything will unfold. And then my fourth year of university came around and I still didn't want to apply. It just didn't feel right. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to trust the universe, hope that everything works out. No, I was freaking out. I was like, I have no idea what I'm going to do. The degree I was in, I did my undergrad in kinesiology, but I knew I didn't like physio, chiro, like that kind of domain. So I was like, what am I going to do with my life? And then the last week of my university career, someone was like, oh, have you heard of naturopathic medicine? And I was like, never heard of it, had no idea what it was. And so I looked up the curriculum. So in Ontario and Toronto, the school's called CCNM, the Canadian College of Naturopathic Medicine. And instantly I read it and I was like, that is exactly what I want to do. I was just like, that's it. So I applied, I got in, and that's how it kind of started. And then looking back, so essentially I had no idea what naturopathic medicine was. I didn't even know, like even in my first year, I was like, what really is this? But
And you were born and raised in Ottawa, right?
Actually in Barrie.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, and then I moved in Ottawa for my high school, kind of, that's when I moved. But I dealt with my own kind of health issues, and essentially I'd always dealt with digestive issues. Nothing was really being done, just being like, oh, don't eat bread, try to go gluten-free, and that was it. And I was like, okay. And looking back, I'm like, no, my patients' concerns were actually quite concerning. I was just so used to living with it. And it was the same thing, kind of menstrual related. I was just put on the birth control pill when I was in grade 8. I kind of re-went on it in grade 12. And then when I switched to an IUD, I had all of these issues that came back up. And like, this is where I started kind of realizing through going through the program, I'm like, oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Like this is happening over and over. And then I realized through my health journey of how much the medical system just isn't good for everything. And kind of strengthened what I wanted to do. And that was kind of how I got introduced to naturopathic medicine a little bit more.
So had you seen an ND?
No.
Did you see an ND through school or just like go to the college, the clinic at the college?
Yeah. I went to a clinic in the college. I honestly remember my parents, even in my second year, they're like, so like, what is an ND? And I'm like, honestly, I still kind of don't know. And it was only until my third year that I was figuring it out a little bit more. And then also like I was dealing with post-concussion and I was really working on how can my diet impact my mental health and kind of that deep dive. And then I was starting to understand like the power of foods and just like the basics and how important that is. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. So in hindsight, what do you think was going on? Like, what do you think was connecting the digestive issues to the menstrual concerns? And like, what flare did you experience with the IUD? I don't think that's something we talk about near enough. Like today's episode, we'll get into some of the post-concussion stuff, but
Mhm.
I always love a story told backwards, if that makes sense, in
Mhm.
terms of, okay, now where you are, what would you have done different? I think there's so much power and there's so much knowledge and learning in that. So walk us through that a little bit.
Yeah. So for my digestive concerns, I was getting loose stools every time I went to the washroom. So maybe 5, 6 times a day for years. I did not have a solid bowel movement for 2, 3 years. And so obviously I'm probably not absorbing anything. So one thing that I did, this was before I started the program, is I was like, being vegetarian was like the new thing. It was the in.
Yeah.
And
Everyone's had their vegan face. Yeah.
so
You got your emo face and your vegan face. Yep.
yeah. And so I initially went vegetarian for the post-concussion kind of, I was watching the documentaries, but my stools, all of a sudden, I didn't have immense pain. I remember I played soccer in university and I had to go on a knee and get off the field because the stomach pains were so bad. And it was so random. And I had gas. I was bloated by the end of the day. And when I went vegetarian, all of that went away. The only thing was that my stools were now kind of like, instead of being like watery consistency, they were more sludgy.
So did you do like healthy vegetarian or were you
Yes.
like carbitarian?
No, I did healthy vegetarian. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just because there's going to be people asking that question. They're like, did she just like
No.
university? Did she just start eating Doritos? Or
And I feel like doing that, it didn't solve the issue, but it just symptomatically helped. Learning things, I'm like, oh my goodness, I definitely had an imbalance of gut bacteria. I probably didn't have enough stomach acid to even digest foods, and I wasn't able to digest meats. So it's not like meat was the issue, it's that my microbiome was more of the issue. And I probably needed antimicrobials. Honestly, I feel like I'm finally getting better because I'm seeing an ND now, and that's probably something I would have done at the time.
Yeah.
But I feel like definitely kind of the gut microbiome piece was a huge one to my symptoms. But now I'm eating meat again because low protein. And that's one thing I didn't know as a vegetarian. If you're not aware, you don't eat enough protein and you don't get enough B12 and you don't get enough iron. And all of a sudden you're fatigued and you have low moods and you're like, oh, do I have depression? It's like, no, you just have some nutrient deficiencies.
Yeah, I ended up, I have a very similar story, right? Undiagnosed celiac for 18 years, was not making enough enzymes, stomach acid to break down my food efficiently. So I just eliminated food after food. So at one point I was down to 10 foods and they were pretty much all vegetables. And that whole process, right? You're sitting there and I've never been more unhealthy, even though I healed some of the gut pieces, not having enough protein, not having enough of those nutrients. And for me, like genetically, I need more B12. I need more methyl donors. I need more of those things and genetically very insulin resistant. Like that was a period of time. I'd been vegan for 5 years and I finally started eating meat because I was like, I feel awful. So obviously like you do you, what works for you, but it is really challenging to meet protein requirements for sure.
Yeah, you can do it, but it is challenging. Yeah. In terms of the menstrual concerns, before going on any kind of birth control, I had really bad period pains where I would sometimes vomit from the pain. And I started getting a lot of back acne. And so they put me on the pill and I was on the pill for 5 maybe years. And then I switched to an IUD because I thought it was affecting my libido. And then my acne came back. It was awful. It was all over my face, my jaw, all over my neck. And the cramps came back, not to the same degree, but it was really the acne. And I do believe I did have irregular periods. It's kind of hard to think back, but I'm pretty sure I remember like having like an 11-day and then 80-day, like just all over the place. So that's where I'm like, okay, interesting. Do I have PCOS? And I started eating to try and manage my blood sugar. So at this time, what I was doing, because I was still in school, I was like, okay, protein, fiber, and healthy fats with every single meal. And my acne went away. So I had it for a year until I tried doing that. All my acne went away. My eczema went away, which I had since I was in grade 8. And I'm like, that's where that connection of like insulin resistance, do I have PCOS?
Pieces, yeah.
Yeah, that kind of whole picture, that's what I think was going on there as well.
Yeah, and in Dash's episode, which will have already come out, we talked a lot about acne and the underlying causes of acne. So for anyone who's like, hey, let's just stay here for a really long time, you can go back to that episode and you can learn all about acne as well. Gotcha. So then where does the post-concussion piece come in for you? Because I know that's something you focus on now in practice, and it's definitely like at the time of this recording, you're the only person at the clinic who has that focus. So let's talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so I had my concussion at the end of my 4th year, and I didn't have a lot of physical symptoms. I had a lot of emotional symptoms.
And this was from soccer?
No, I was just out and about, and I was outside. I slipped on the ice. I didn't even hit my head. I think it was more of a whiplash.
Gotcha.
It
was out and about.
It was St. Paddy's Day.
4th year of university. Let's just put that out. I was also out and about at one point and have a scar on my head from having to get staples and being hospitalized. So yeah, for all of you youth, monitor your out and about activities and you will be better for it.
I swear my out and about activities had nothing to do. There was ice on the sidewalk, and that is why I fell. And I stand by that.
Sure. I do not. I was wildly intoxicated in my 3rd year. So I will own mine. You can stay behind your icy sidewalks if you want. I will own mine.
Yeah. When I talk about my journey and we come to when I got my 2nd concussion, ask me again how I got it.
There we go. There we go. See, everyone, naturopathic doctors in the making.
Yeah. So I didn't even know concussions, there wasn't an emotional piece. I thought it was just purely physical, and I was just so angry. And it's like I could tell that I was angry, but I couldn't do anything about it. And I was so disconnected from my body. I would cry at any given moment when mentally I was okay. And I was just up and down. I remember there were friends that I didn't want to talk to for absolutely no reason. And it's just like, I was just so confused of what's going on. And it just seems like when I went for support, it's just like, oh, don't exercise, stay in the dark for a little bit, and you'll get better. And I'm like, okay, but my physical, like, I'm okay with the light. Like, yes, I had a little bit of a headache. Yes, the light was a bit much, but it was really the emotional piece. And I don't know if I ever got the support I needed, but I went to therapy, and my therapist had connected me with someone who had 5 concussions. And one thing I struggled with is I just felt like a different person. I felt like I lost my identity. I didn't know who I was anymore. I didn't like the same things. Even though I presented the same, like inside, I was completely different. And because I didn't understand, it was hard to communicate that with other people. And I was trying to get back to who I was.
I love how you just articulated that, because there are so many people who did not have a supportive therapist, who do not have people in their life who believe that a concussion can result in those symptoms. And so I just want anyone who needed to hear that to really let that sink in, that any form of head trauma can change your personality, right? It can change very key aspects, whether that's transiently or permanently. And it's a very real thing. And it can be supported. But I think the point you make is a really critical one about all of the changes that can happen with falling on the ice, right? Which we typically in our society, it's like, I'll just move forward.
Yeah. And I never thought of my fall as something drastic. So I'm like, I barely moved my head, But when I got connected to that person, she was telling me, she's like, you're going through the stages of grief. Like, you have lost who you are. And like, the sooner you can accept that you're never going to be who you were, the better you'll be. Because at this point, I was so hyper fixated on becoming who I was before. It was almost leading me almost a depression, like a low grade depression. Like, I just kept journaling every day, and it was just making me so sad. And I think that clicked for me. And she's like, I forget what these 5 stages of grief are, but anger was one, kind of denial. And that was kind of the turning point for me, where I was like, okay, I'm just someone who's new. And this is something else. I was someone who always intellectualized my feelings. So I knew who I was because I intellectualized everything. And my concussion maybe took that ability away. And so now it's I really had to connect with my body, connect my body and my brain, because I wasn't able to just compartmentalize.
Compartmentalize.
Yeah.
Bianca struggles with words. Sometimes we could call it a concussion-related thing, but esophagus is not a word. Esophagus is.
I blame it because I'm French. And I did all my education in French until CCNM. So
you guys can only imagine. People listen to this podcast, get like insights into our daily calls, and they're like, why would anyone want to work there?
no, we're a hoot. Why wouldn't anyone want to work with us?
Oh, man. Anyways, continue with your compartmentalizing.
Yeah. So that was kind of something that was interesting too, that I was forced to face my feelings and my emotions that I just weren't able to hide. And that was probably a 2-3 year journey. Yeah. And one thing that I just want to like slide in here is that I lost the ability to think. I couldn't have thoughts. I wasn't able to visualize anymore, and I stopped dreaming. I just wasn't able to. And it was really frustrating because, you know, like me, I love the whole like visualize and manifest. And I'm like closing my eyes to do it. And I could not. It was like taking so much energy to create the smallest image. And one thing that was interesting is in my 4th year, I took a homeopathic, and it wasn't even for my concussion, because by then I was doing a bit better. All of a sudden, I was able to dream again, which I think is so interesting. And now I can dream, now I can have thoughts. But for like that 4-year period.
Every patient who's ever seen you is now grateful for this moment. They're like, oh, she can think again. Like,
no, but it's just like, you know how sometimes your mind's running and you think your thoughts. But
well, it's the meta. You can like acknowledge the thought as it's rolling through and hold it, as opposed to it just coming out as a complete statement. Yeah.
Exactly. Like it's almost like I just knew what to say without having to think it. But now it's like I'm back to able to do that, and I can daydream again, you know?
Yeah.
But it's just interesting because I never thought that like a concussion, like, oh, you can't like have thoughts anymore. And it was really cool being able to experience both sides.
Yeah. 100%. So then with those concussion pieces, because I love that you brought all of that up. That is fascinating. As someone who has had 4, probably 5 concussions, I actually was extremely fortunate. I didn't deal with any post-concussive issues. Like I literally hit my head so hard at one point, and this was not with the staples, that I lost vision. I couldn't see. Yeah. And that was curling. So this is why this woman does not do a winter sport.
I'm not good at winter
sports.
Not
that is a sport. But like you will not find me on ice or snow or anything like that. But within that, I never experienced a lot of really significant cysts. Even when I cracked my head open, I was back at work 4 days later. Should I have been? No, but I was. So I think it's such an important conversation to have, to look at like the whole spectrum of challenges people can experience when they have concussions. So I think that's going to help a lot of people.
Yeah, I think so. I recall like finding an Instagram page, and they shared stories of people who had concussions. And then even it was family members commenting how like, my daughter's not the same and whatnot. And I was like, oh my God, it like just opens your eyes to like how much people suffer with concussions, and it's not just that physical thing. So yeah, that's why I have a bit of an interest in it.
So walk us through then from like a physiological perspective. What are some of the components that can lead someone to get stuck in that post-concussive state versus someone who recovers?
Yeah, so a big one is just neuroinflammation, so inflammation of the brain. And when there's inflammation anywhere, things don't work as optimally. And we also see a lot of mitochondrial damage. So our mitochondria, if we remember our grade 10 science class, the powerhouse of the cell, it's what makes our energy. And if we're not able to make as much energy in our brain and we can't fuel our brain, well, then we're going to have kind of that brain fog, those mood changes and things like that. So those are 2 big kind of pieces. And also, I mean, we always kind of bring it back to insulin, but apparently like blood sugar regulation gets messed up a little bit. And I think that's why there's a bit of research with kind of going keto for the first 2 months after a concussion, just because of how off it is. And we do know that like high insulin, high glucose can cause oxidative damage and things like that in the brain.
And even just like the recovery process. So in order for any tissue or organ to recover, it's going to have different energy requirements than just general day-to-day use. And we know that your brain and your nervous system require so much nutrients that if there is that little bit of insulin resistance and there is, or a lot of insulin resistance, and there is less bioavailable glucose in any given moment, you struggle to transition between glucose availability and ketone availability and those types of things, which are those fuel sources for the brain, then people can hit walls. Like it's truthfully like your energy, and then boom, all of a sudden you can't think, you can't process, you can't like, it's this really ugly transition where you can also go from being okay to absolutely not okay, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
Today's episode is brought to you by none other than Advanced Women's Health. If you are interested in diving in deeper to your health, if you are finally ready to feel like yourself, and you are finally over hearing everything's normal, everything's fine, and you want a deeper dive into your healthcare, then we are here to help you. We are currently helping patients in British Columbia and Ontario, Canada. But don't worry, if you're in another province, still reach out, get added to the wait list as we expand coast to coast. We cannot wait to work with you. Check out the show notes for more information on how to get started. So then what is the approach that you take? Like, how do you think through, you have someone who comes in, they're dealing with post-concussive. What is your order of events? Like, what are the key things that you think about? We can go through a couple of your favorite supplements at the end, but I would just love to know, like, you to explain to everyone what that process looks like. What are you investigating? What kinds of questions are you asking to help better understand what's going on?
Yeah. So, I mean, blood work is always a good start. Just kind of seeing like, is there that insulin resistance, even though the brain and the body can have different kind of things going on, but it's always good to get an idea of what is happening. So that would be kind of like an insulin glucose challenge test. We check our inflammatory markers. Gut health is also important for neurotransmitter production, and if the brain maybe not working optimally, we want to make sure the gut's working optimally. I mean, sometimes hormones can kind of get out of whack as well. So if you have the brain fog and the fatigue, maybe let's look at the thyroid. But in terms of treatment, obviously what comes up on blood work is things that we are going to address, but really working on the neuroinflammation and the mitochondrial health. So, like your omega-3. One thing as well that's really good kind of acutely, depending on when the patient kind of comes in, is even like arnica, like a homeopathic is good just for that immediate bruising and just helping on that regard. So those are things that we kind of want to address. And then just supporting the patient where, do you need support with like a community kind of group of people who are going through the same thing? Do you need a therapist? And kind of outreaching to other resources and practitioners as well.
Yeah, there's so much that goes into breaking neuroinflammation cycles, right? Like it's mitochondria, it's digestion, it's blood sugar, it's nutrient deficiencies. This is something I talk about a lot with patients, that loop of dysfunction with progesterone. So when you get a concussion, depending on where, this is the thing that's interesting about concussions to me. And again, it's not an area that I spend millions of hours researching by any means, but when you are in this space, depending on where you hit your head, it's going to have really dramatically different impacts on your symptoms. And I have patients that get a concussion and then stop ovulating for a few months. And because again, like when we talk about the axis, so we call it, you'll hear HPA, HPO axis, hypothalamus, pituitary, both of those in your brain, right? Well, yeah, I'm going to say that. And then ovaries or adrenal. So it's how your brain is signaling to your ovaries, how your brain is signaling to your adrenal glands. And so we can see really rapid shifts in cortisol, right? We can see cortisol levels drop. We can see the ovulate, like the cascade that we need of events to ovulate can become dysfunctional and people cannot ovulate. But we need proper cortisol regulation. We need proper levels of progesterone in order to reduce that inflammation. And like there's a doc in town here, and he always says, he's like, as soon as someone's over 45 and they get post-concussion, I'm sending them to you. Because he's like, it's hormonal. Like at that point, there's such a huge hormonal component that they need the hormones to reduce the inflammation. But we can't make the hormones ourselves. And he's like, it's not my rodeo. So you just take it away. But it's a really important conversation to look at, like how people can get stuck in this absolute loop of dysfunction when it comes to any kind of head trauma. So you mentioned some of the things, but what are some of your favorite supplements and things that you like to use and explore when it comes to post-concussion?
I was gonna so excited for in general. Okay, so post-concussion wise, I feel like the Mito formula, I feel like that's just such a great one just because it can help with that energy, it can help with the brain fog, it helps with the oxidative damage. It's kind of a bit of a well-rounded supplement when it comes to post-concussion.
Definitely.
I feel like kind of high dose omega 3s as well, just for the inflammation, also just for the like healthy fat component is a go-to. And even just the histamine, maybe even like quercetin, the histamine kind of piece that we haven't really talked about. But I feel like we've been seeing more and more histamine symptoms in general in practice, kind of affecting more than just allergies. And I feel like I can see benefit as well, just kind of incorporating that piece into the picture.
And one of the things I don't think we've talked about on the podcast is that vestibular connection with histamine. So the histamine response, part of the reason why we get seasick is because there's a high level of neurological like histamine exposure. And our body is constantly trying to find the horizon. And from a vestibular standpoint, the vestibular system is affected by histamine. And so we're just struggling with that neurohistamine inflammatory connection to find that equilibrium. And so we can get really seasick. You can get really nauseous. You can get, again, foggy, not feel great. Car sickness is the same. Like car sickness and seasickness have a very strong histamine component. And there is that subcategory of people with concussions that come in and that's their symptom, right? They feel like they lose their balance, there's nausea, there's vomiting, like they are just struggling with that. So I agree with you. I think that's an example of where it's not showing up as allergies or rashes, but there's a very strong neurological connection there.
For sure.
So you were so excited about general supplements. So why don't you take it away? Like tell us what you prepared, Bianca.
So in my practice right now, I see a lot of menstrual concern, digestive concern, and fatigue. That's kind of what I've been seeing a lot of lately. And I feel like no matter what someone's coming in, the beginning of a treatment plan, a lot of the times I'm working on gut health. So antimicrobials. I don't know if I can name certain ones, but
yeah, go for it. Especially herbs. Like I think people always love to know the different herbs.
Okay. Well, I was going to name some combo products, but in them, I love Candibactin BR. I love His Clear, which is a product that we make at Advanced Women's Health. But there's berberine in it. This is where my pronunciation is going to come in. Scutellaria bicalensis.
Close enough. I'll let you have it. We have a lot of people who pronounce things very weird at the clinic. Like it is a running joke on our calls. The number of things you and Sasha and Lauren Dingwall say. I'm just going to call you all out. I love you all to death. But I just sit there and I'm like, oh my goodness, how did we get through med school?
By reading in COVID, all virtual. You know?
Yeah, this is true. Lots of COVID babies.
Yes. Yeah. And I have black cumin seed, which like a few of these, they work on the insulin pathway. They help the liver. They can help with like thyroid. So they're antiviral, antimicrobial, antiparasitic, kind of a bit of everything depending on what's going on. So that's kind of a huge thing that I love. I do a lot of nervous system support as well, just because, everyone's stressed, everyone's anxious, their nervous system is just overstimulated. So valerian calm, which has valerian, passion flowers, ziziphus are one I use quite often, or even more on the transmitter side, like the L-theanine, the GABA, that kind of combo would be like my second, even though I've named like 10. And then the third.
The third/13th. Continue, yes.
Yeah, and I'm combo products. I'm making it, just 3, but it's 10 different things. I really like kind of addressing that histamine component, but through a menstrual kind of lens. So the resveratrol supreme or the uterocalm that we carry, I think those have been game changers as well. So those are my 3 favorites.
There we go. It's so interesting to me as someone who constantly formulates products, uses so many different products. We always come back to these foundational things, right? And I will say this, we should get this on a shirt at some point, but herbs are smarter than people, right? They have such diverse functions. How they work is so diverse. Most pharmaceuticals started with an herbal mechanism, right? Like we learned so much from herbs, and when we are combining things that have the ability to support and stabilize the immune system, to reduce viral load, to reduce the number of bacteria that are overgrowing, to support glucose, it's because health at its core is actually really simple. And I know I've said this before, I'll say it again. It's something I'm really passionate about. Health at its core is very simple. And so what we need to do as providers is figure out what are the couple of things, the 2 or 3 mechanisms that are overlapping that we can treat with violence, right? That we can come in and we can hit really hard and make really significant traction. And so as much as we have these combo products and we talk about a lot of different herbs, 90% of the time they're falling into 2 or 3 mechanisms. And especially in advanced women's health, that's what your doctor is working on. They're working on 2 or 3 things at a time. And then we get to visit 2 and 3 and we're transitioning that triangle. We're transitioning to the point that we move out of just symptom reduction into like really long-term toolkits. I'm extremely fortunate in my practice. I don't take new patients actively anymore. I haven't in a number of years, which means a lot of my patients have been with me forever. Like my OG patients are 9-10 years with me now. And they are people that have a toolkit. We've worked through the triangle so many times that they know inside out and backwards what their symptoms are. And they check in twice a year to be like, hey, I think this is activating, or I think this is going off, or I think this got triggered. But the beautiful thing is that health at its core, there's simplicity to it. It's just making sure that you work with practitioners that can piece things together so you're not on a pill for every ill, which is no different than how a lot of other models of medicine work, right?
Yeah, that's something that I love working with you, is that especially when you're a new grad and you're starting off practice, everything seems so overwhelming. And, a lot of patients, they've been dealing with health issues for 10 plus years. So it can be overwhelming being like, oh my God, I have this, I have this, I have it. And it's like, where do you start? But if you just narrow it down, like you said, you really can pinpoint it to 3 kind of foundations that you can work on and get so much traction and then work from there. So that's something that I've been loving learning from you and just utilizing at the clinic.
How great. I don't know.
We'll see how it works.
Yeah.
It does work, and we don't need to overcomplicate things.
Well, and I think that's honestly for me, the team jokes that they want to interview me on a podcast and like just dive into things. But I think that's one of the things for me that I really took for granted for a number of years. Like I've taught practitioners 7 years now, 6, 7 years, like for a while. And the more you teach, the better you get. And I think having so many patients go through advanced women's health, like we see over 1,000 patients a month, I just get so much exposure to be such a better teacher. And as a researcher, I'm always testing hypothesis, right? I'm always like, is this true? And it just keeps going back. And I say this to our team every day, the more complex the symptoms, the more complex it feels, the more simple the starting treatment. Yes. Right? Because you can do deeper work at the bottom than you can at the top. Mm-hmm. And it's hard to articulate because to patients, it doesn't feel simple. It feels sophisticated. And to other practitioners, when we say, oh, just start with the simple pieces, a lot of them are like, okay, let's start with drinking water and getting your steps in and falling asleep. And it's like, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about like the fundamental aspects of the foundation of health and getting into treating that. So it's funny because even for me, I've stepped away from using some of those, like the term basics. Yep. I'll use foundational components or like these types of things, because I think there's so much confusion nowadays between the importance of going for a walk, which is great, and what's actually foundational to health. And I think that's going to be something that people hear a lot more about in 2025 is the difference between those things, because when you get it, you can't unsee it. Yeah. Like you can't unsee it, right? You're just like, and it's taken me a long time to get to that place. So thank you for all of my patients who've been with me for 10 years, because it wasn't always like this, right? Who let me test those theories, who did all those things, because that's how you get, that's why they call it the practice of medicine, right? Is because you're always constantly iterating. And yeah, and you guys just come along for the ride, which I love you for.
I love to be here.
So then any other things you really want people to know, that you really want women to know? I would say especially with the concussion world, because that's one that we're not going to have a lot on here because there's not a lot of people who do it. So I would love for you to leave people with a few takeaways of what they could consider, what they could do, what you wish you knew when you were in that experience that would help someone else out.
Yeah. I wish I knew that you can get better and it won't take years if you don't get support, because that's how I felt. Like I thought I was never going to get out of it and it was kind of just my forever. And that's not the case at all. And I would also want to tell them that, you might not be who you were before. And the quicker you can realize that, the quicker you can grow who you are now. And in a sense, it's kind of nice because you have a clean slate to be like, who am I now? Like, that's kind of interesting and fun. And you still are fundamentally, you are still you. It's just things are a little bit different. So it's kind of just like growing pains almost. So I would definitely want them that there's hope and it's not going to be like this forever. There are things that we can do, and also that we take you seriously. I think a lot of the times it wasn't that bad, or, I don't understand why I'm like, it's valid. You are validated. What you are experiencing is valid and true. And that's something I would want them to know as well.
It's so important. Even so, this is a totally different topic, but very related. Whenever I have a patient in my office and they're going to give birth, or one of our doctors, because we got a lot of reproductively fit humans at this clinic, is pregnant, I always say the only thing you're going to grieve is expectation. And you need to expect that you're going to grieve your identity, right? Transitioning from being a very strong and independent woman to a mom who had a Latino baby, and now I have two, who need a lot of me. They need a lot of touch. They need a lot of emotional support and intelligence and all those types of things. It was a very rough transition. And I wish in that moment someone had told me it's normal to grieve your identity and it's normal to grieve this whole process because the only thing you grieve is expectation. I wish I knew that. And so I love that you bring that into the health context, because we talk a lot, like in habit change research, in the app, in all of these things that I'm consistently working on, it's talking about identity. It's talking about these different things because there's such key components to someone's health journey. But it also can be a really key component of what can make someone who is hit with an illness or disease struggle to get help. So for anyone listening who feels like you're in that boat, I want you to embrace what Bianca has said, that you can get better. You can feel like a new and better version of yourself. It can be exciting, but we also need to meet you where you're at in the process of all of it.
Well said.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming on. It has been a pleasure, and I'm sure that we will pop in and bring in more neuroinflammation conversations and all of that kind of stuff. But yes, I can't wait for people to hear this. And for everyone who listens, let us know. Do you want more post-concussion stuff? What does that look like? Because it feels like a niche topic, but when you talk to the number of people who've had concussions, it's so many people, right? So, and if you were just out and about when you got your concussion, there's no shame in that game, because the two of us were also just out and about when we got ours. So
no judgment here.
No judgment zone. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on. And thank you everyone for listening. If you love this, please always leave us a rating and review. We can't wait to hear from you, and have a beautiful day. Bye.
Thank you so much for listening. I hope that you had as much fun as we did. And if you loved today's episode, share it with a friend and leave us a review. That is how we spread this message, and that is how we are going to revolutionize healthcare in Canada for women. Have a beautiful day and be well.